Hi, and welcome back to the next episode of Behind the Channel, a video series that talks about people and not product. Eagle-eyed viewers will notice that I'm not John Nolan. I am Emma Lewis, Senior Marketing Manager at Arrow. And today I am joined by Guy March, who is VP of EMEA Channels at Tenable.
Thanks very much, Emma. Great to be here.
Good to have you on. Could you give a little bit of a synopsis of your current role and what you do at the moment?
Absolutely. So I work for Tenable. We're the cyber exposure company. We help customers understand and prioritize risk across their attack surface. My role is to lead the channel organization, which is 17 people across Europe, Middle East and Africa. And we are responsible for all partner and distributor relationships across that region.
Amazing. Big job.
Yeah, it is a big job. It's a great job. It's very interesting, yeah.
So if we take it all the way back to kind of how you entered the industry, if you could tell us a little bit about how you got into the IT industry originally, and also what your first role or first couple of roles looked like.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I say, came out of university with a geology degree. Didn't really necessarily think about geology as a long-term career. And like a lot of people, probably discovered IT a little bit by accident. Living and working in Cambridge, there was a ton of startup companies at the time. And my first job actually was working for the county council, doing a support role, looking after social services, which was really interesting, very different day-to-day role to what I do now. But fundamentally, I was responsible for dealing with lots of different questions coming in from all around the county and trying to fix IT issues, very simply. So didn't really know a lot about IT, but I was happy to talk to people and help them fix their problems. And I suppose at that point, I was sort of naturally more of a sort of post-sales support kind of person. I went on to work for a startup at St John's Innovation Centre in Cambridge, which is where companies like Autonomy started back in that period of time. And that was a really interesting place to work. Lots of different companies under one roof, all effectively under the guise of Cambridge University sponsoring that facility. And got to mix with some really interesting people, built a bit of a network there. And it was a very interesting place to work, but I kind of realised at that point that maybe I'd kind of outgrown that company, wanted to do something different. And I remember seeing an advert for a role at Unipalm, which became Computer Links, for a post-sales engineer. And I had the interview in Newmarket, not far from this office. And during the course of the interview, the guy on the other side of the table stopped me and said, "We don't think you'd be right for this role, but we have got a pre-sales role which we think you'd be better suited to. Would you be interested in considering that instead?" And so absolutely took them up on their offer, went through another set of interviews, ended up getting that job. And so I joined Computer Links before it became Arrow, obviously, and ended up working as an SE for around 5 years or so. So that was my first foray into cyber security, really just on a chance of seeing that advert. So it wasn't premeditated. As I say, going through school and going through my studies, I'd never considered a career in IT, but it was just circumstance, really. And having that opportunity, looking back now, that was a really pivotal moment in my career, joining what became Arrow. And I loved it and did 5 years as an SE. And then I switched to more of a sales role, working with people like Ben Taylor and lots of people who are still with your business now, and representing some of the vendors, some of which are still part of your portfolio now. And loved that, and actually found that I enjoyed more the talking to people aspect rather than the more technical aspect. And so that naturally kind of led to channel sales.
Makes sense. That was actually going to be one of my questions, which was what made you think of moving from a technical role into a sales role, because they are very, very different.
Yeah, no, they are different. And I was never, an out and out techie. I learned, the products, and I was, very happy to explain what they did. And I enjoyed going around with the salespeople. We were very much working as a team back then. So I would go out with sellers as the technical person representing the vendor they wanted to position. Obviously, that was more of a team combined effort where they'd be talking about the commercial aspects, I'd be talking more about the technology. I just loved the people interaction. And so actually, having enjoyed that a lot more, that step into the commercial role was quite a straightforward transition for me.
Yeah. And after your time at Computerlinks, where did you go next?
Yeah, I mean, it was over 10 years, so it was not a short amount of times. As I say, I did 5 years roughly as an SE, 5 years roughly as a product specialist, and then I was actually the product specialist for Blue Coat Systems, which doesn't exist anymore. It's gone through multiple acquisitions into what it is now with Broadcom. And I left Computerlinks in 2011, having been the Blue Coat product specialist here, to then go to work for Blue Coat themselves as a channel account manager in the UK.
That time at Blue Coat, obviously you mentioned it's gone through multiple acquisitions. You were also there for a significant amount of time, numerous different roles and acquisitions. Can you talk anything around that experience of?
Yeah, no, it was a great company. I had a brilliant group of people that I worked with, and obviously I knew a lot about the company already, having been the product specialist working here with Scott Slack, who is still Arrow, obviously. So Scott and I had a great time, really good relationship. So going into work for Blue Coat was a very seamless transition, having known the products and known the people already. As I say, I was a channel account manager initially, and then I pretty quickly changed roles. I then did some work with our GSIs at the time, so more exposed to some of the system integrators and service providers, and then ended up becoming a manager. So we built the channel team, and there was a need to bring a manager into the UK business. And I remember being a little bit hesitant about that step into management. That was back in about 2013, I think. And wasn't necessarily something I was wanting to do, but I think if you are successful in your job and you're well respected by your leadership team, it's an opportunity that often comes knocking. Looking back, that was a great moment. Again, another pivotal moment in my career. First foray into management. And I remember the VP at the time saying to me, look, we think you should take the job here. And the reality is, if you don't do it here and you join another company where you don't know the people, you don't know the products, that's going to be a pretty hard role to take. So if you want to do it here, this is the ideal environment to see if it's something that you would consider to do long term. And so I became a manager. I was then responsible for UK, Ireland, Israel, and Sub-Saharan Africa was the region. And I was managing, a team of about 5 or 6 people across that region. And really enjoyed it. I got a lot of satisfaction actually out of helping coach the team, developing people, helping them be successful and really enjoy their experience working within my team, and realised actually this is what I want to do. So, fast forward again from there, I did that role for about 3.5 years, and then we got acquired by Symantec actually. So that was 2016. So I went into Symantec, and that was an interesting one because on the face of it, it was Symantec buying Blue Coat, a large company buying a smaller one. But it was a reverse takeover, essentially, and the Blue Coat leadership came into Symantec and took over the running of Symantec, and I was part of that process. So my job was really to combine 2 channel teams, the Symantec team and the existing Blue Coat team, into one new Symantec team. Change of office, we started working in the city, in London. It was a big change, and it was quite a challenging time, but ultimately a brilliant time that I really, really enjoyed. And bringing 2 teams together was not easy.
No.
Different cultures, different ways of doing things, different backgrounds. Everything was quite different. And having to really steer the ship and integrate teams very quickly, I learned so much during that time. So that, again, was a really key point in my career. And then, again, I worked there from 2016 until early 2020, which was a couple of months after Symantec got acquired by Broadcom. So I really only did a couple of months at Broadcom and then joined Tenable.
Obviously, you mentioned kind of going through those acquisitions. It's challenging, and I think definitely what we've been seeing in the industry over the last 5, 6, 7 years is those bigger acquisitions, and they're still happening today. So is there any advice that you would give people that are going through an acquisition or to kind of support with those challenges?
Yeah, it's. I think just be yourself is important. When you get acquired, it can be quite upsetting for some people because everything does change, right? But equally, it's an opportunity. So embrace the change. Really buy into it, and trust the leadership. And I always believe good things happen to good people. So if you go out of your way to be visible, to absorb the values and the culture of the new company as quickly as possible and to really integrate with that, maintaining what you already have from the acquisition. Obviously, they bought you for a reason. And so to be respectful of you have been acquired, going into the new company, make yourself visible, get to know your colleagues. That was difficult, right? And of course, me showing up as a new manager with new team members, they didn't know me. And so I had to take the time to really connect with them and for them to trust me, not just my team, but everybody around that, the salespeople, the rest of the leadership team, the SEs, the marketing folks. I think really making an effort to connect with all of them so you build those relationships as quickly as possible and to be present in the office. You can't do all of that remotely. So I was commuting into London probably 4 days a week back then to make sure I was present in the office, really kind of getting to know my colleagues. And I think then the whole thing becomes a lot easier, really. So I think what I learned, and I didn't kind of know that in my mind. It was just something that I wanted to do. It felt like the right thing to do. And so ultimately that stood me in really good stead to then kind of lead the team through the acquisition and to kind of really make people feel part of the new company as quickly as possible. And it was a new team. It was a new team for the Symantec folks as well, because obviously they had new colleagues. So effectively, we'd taken these two completely separate teams and created a completely brand new team on the back of it. So, and I remember at the time, when we brought other new people into the business, quite often they would ask me for advice, and I just said, get in the office, get to know everybody, and be engaged. That's looking back on it, that was the number one piece of advice I gave to new people.
Which is actually a really interesting piece of advice when we look at where we are now, especially since 2020, where there was the lockdowns and everyone went remote, and now companies seem to be trying to get people back in the office, but there is still that reluctancy because people have been working from home for a long time, and we have the right technology to be able to support that. But I think it doesn't replace that human interaction and that face-to-face interaction.
No, 100%. I mean, I was lucky when COVID happened that I'd been in the industry a long time, so I had a big network of people that I relied on. But I think if you were a new starter coming into the industry back then with no network, you can't build that on a webcam sat behind Teams or Zoom. So, I think, at the end of the day, the channel is a people business. And those connections are very important. And you just don't make those connections if you're sat at home. So I think, obviously, we learned a lot during that time as well. And I still leverage all of those tools today. So if I'm doing QBRs or, meetings with partners that I know well, I may not travel. I may do those remotely. But I use it really as a tool to manage my time effectively, not a substitute to replace the interpersonal contact, which is still just as important as it's ever been.
Yeah. We've spoken about the importance of being visible, and that's something that you've really focused on within your career. How important has that personal brand and that visibility been to you during periods of change, like the acquisitions that you've gone through?
I think it's vital, really, because your personal brand is not something that happens automatically. It can take many years subconsciously of just building up that brand. takes hard work. It takes being visible. It takes, some of the things I talked about, communicating effectively with your peers and with people in different parts of your organization. And then if you do go into a period of change, which at some point is inevitable for all of us working in the IT industry, that personal brand is really what I believe kind of carries you through, and your own reputation. Then if you're able to do that, then as I said earlier, I believe good things happen to good people.
Correct. So if we look at kind of from that conversation, we're talking about the technology. This is obviously still about people, not about technology, but how would you say the industry has changed from when you joined it to now? Because you've been in the industry a while.
Well, yeah, old school, right? Look, I mean, I think the people aspect is still very similar. Actually, obviously, the biggest change is the technology. It's become a lot more mainstream. I think everybody now understands what cybersecurity is, for a start, and I think people's awareness of what the channel is has evolved as well. So, but I think deep down, the things that we used to do when I first started out are still very, very important. That interaction from a people level is still a big part of it. So yeah, technology is increasing at a faster pace. Technology trends are increasing at a faster pace, and obviously things like AI now are accelerating that even more. But I think deep down, the channel is about people talking to people interacting with people, and that bit is still very similar to what it was when I first started out.
Yes, it is a very engaging and people-centric industry, and I think that's what a lot of people seem to love about it as well.
Yeah.
When we're talking about people and talking about your career, is there anything in particular or anyone in particular maybe that has helped to shape who you've become today, from a mentor to something a little bit less professional as a mentor, essentially?
Yeah, I suppose when I look back, I mean, there's lots of people. I've never formally had a mentor, so I've never been part of a program as such. On the kind of receiving end, if you like, I'm now part of the mentor program at Tenable, and I'm being a mentor for other people. But for me personally, I took a lot on board from some of the managers that I worked with over the years. Not just managers, but seeing other people achieving success, watching other sellers do very well, or watching other people from other departments do well. And so I think being that sponge within any business over the course of your career is a really good thing, right? And being open to absorbing those ideas. And I suppose subconsciously there's various bits of advice that I can still remember now, people giving me over the years, that I think are still really, really helpful. That what I just said earlier about being visible, taking time to really listen to people, to understand the motivations of others, to kind of listen first to talk second, I think is important in channel, because you're dealing with so many different priorities, different objectives, different cultures, different types of people that if you just talk about your own way of doing things, you're going to miss the point a lot of the time. You're not necessarily going to align with other people on what's important for them. So I think having that sort of calmness to really spend time listening to people, not overreact to things. These are all things that I've learned through some of the best leaders that I've worked with. And I suppose looking back as well, going through that those acquisitions I talked about, just understanding that sometimes less is more as well. We work in a very complex environment with complex technologies, but actually I really like trying to simplify that as much as possible, so that whoever you're talking to, whether that's a partner, whether that's a distributor, whether that's a customer, you're really taking steps to explain something very complex and breaking it down into a pretty simplified form as much as you can.
So if we kind of take it back or bring it forward to where you are now, obviously a senior leadership role, are there any values that guide you in what you do today in terms of how you engage with partners or how you lead your teams?
Yeah, I like to lead from the front. I wouldn't ask my team to do anything that I wouldn't do myself. I think, that's one that obviously springs to mind straight away. I have high expectations. Definitely, I think about the sort of non-negotiables as something that's important to me. Show up on time, always reply after you've and respond. Something I was talking about in my team QBR this week. We do a lot of meetings in the channel, but making sure that you take the time to send the follow-up to that meeting within 24 hours so that that partner is driving the actions you need them to do. Things like that are important. I think to do the basics repeatedly takes real commitment. And I always think about, sporting analogies, how often you hear, say, a Premier League football manager after losing a game say, we didn't do the basics, we lost the game. And it's the same in channel sales. If we don't do the basics, we've lost the game. Somebody else is effectively taking our business. So the basics are super important. All of the high level stuff fails straight away if you're not repeatedly doing the basics. So my approach there is to maintain that really high bar, to not drop below it. And that's super important for me. And getting everybody to buy into that if you can do that as part of your DNA, you will be successful. And actually partners appreciate it. They notice it. If you follow up when you say you're going to follow up, you do the things you say you're going to do. That's really important. That gets noticed. People appreciate it when you say, I'm going to call you back at 2:00 tomorrow, and you call them back at 2:00. You don't forget and call them back 2 hours later or the next day. Simple things like that, I think, are just as important now as they've ever been. I suppose growing up, my parents didn't work in the channel. They didn't know anything about cybersecurity. But two things that they taught me are, hard work and being nice to people. And I think whatever you do, whether you work in cyber, whether you work in any industry, they are two great values. Work hard and go out of your way to help other people out and be nice to people. Take the time to really help them fix some of their problems as well. And I think if you can do that across your career, I think you'll be in a good place.
They're two really good values as well. Actually, I think you could apply them to other aspects of life as well.
Absolutely.
Outside of career.
Yeah.
So if we're looking at that work-life balance piece, and that is does seem to be a bit of a buzzword at the moment. I mean, do you have a work-life balance? Is it something that you're conscious of? I hear on the grapevine you are a DJ.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. No, I mean, it's. I'll talk about that in a second. I think the one thing, the major difference I noticed when I left distribution and started working for a vendor. When I worked in distribution, you would come to the office most days. You would see the same people each day. When you work for a vendor, it was a remote role. This is before COVID. I've been a remote worker now for 16 years or so. And, you've got to have discipline with that, right? And, you tend to find that your working days become a lot longer. And, you might do some work early in the morning, then maybe take a little bit of a break for half an hour or so. And you tend to find that your work is really the kind of hours when you're not asleep, really, especially juggling multiple time zones as well. You have to then be disciplined with yourself to actually take breaks. And, I've never done a global role, but that's even more challenging because you've just got 24/7 email calls, and obviously you need to take time for yourself. So, when I started working at Bluecoat, I remember that year I moved house, I started a new job, and I had my first child all within about 8 months. And so there was a lot going on. And it's hard juggling all of that. You just have to, there's no rule book. You just have to work out what works for you. And everybody's different. And I was always very disciplined. If I was in the office and the door was shut, I was working, right? So, I wouldn't get distracted and I'd be really focused on what I was doing. But everybody's busy. Work-life balance is hard. And, I think you just have to find what works for you. And I think now when I manage my team, I manage based on outcome. So if they're doing their numbers, if I get good feedback from their colleagues in their regions, if I get good feedback from their partners, then generally that we're in a good place, right? Obviously, if some of that's not happening, then I want to know why, and I'll support them in getting through that. But I don't need to know exactly where they are every minute of the day, right? And if they want to take a bit of time off, they need a bit more flexibility, I'm completely fine with that, right? So the outcome is the important thing, not really the day-to-day. How they do that is really down to them. I trust people to do the job I've asked them to do.
And that trust piece is really important, isn't it, I think?
Yeah, absolutely. But no, I do have interests outside of work. I'm not just a channel VP. So yeah, I have been a DJ for a long time. That's a big passion of mine. And we can turn this into a podcast about house music if you want. Or maybe we can turn it into a podcast about football as well, which is another big passion of mine. So I'm a Watford season ticket holder. I've had a season ticket most of my life. So yeah, I mean, look, it's important to have passions outside of work. And, I fill my time up every week.
Geology degree, IT career, DJ career.
I could have, yeah. I mean, actually, I used to work with a guy here who was a marketing manager who ended up becoming a world tour resident for Ministry of Sound and started reducing his hours working in distribution as a marketing manager as he was getting flown first class around the world, and ended up doing very well for himself. So shout out to Nick Bridges. I mean, that could have been me in another life, but cyber kind of took over.
So obviously you've spoken about working for distribution, and that was essentially your first step into the industry. Was there anything in particular that you feel like you learned from working at distribution compared to working at a vendor?
Yeah, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I'll be honest. I often say to people, working in distribution, if you're starting out, is a much better place to be than working for a vendor, primarily because you see so much. I was exposed to pretty much every vendor within the cyber portfolio, and every partner. And when you work for a vendor, you're kind of pretty narrowly focused on your piece of the market, and so you just don't see as much. So I was lucky that I was working in distribution at a time when all of those cyber companies were growing very rapidly. I got to build my network across all of those companies, across all of those partners. And so for me, that I still rely on that network today. And so I don't think I would have been able to build that in quite the same way if I'd just gone to work for a vendor. So I absolutely, when I look back at my time, it was fantastic. And it wasn't by design that I ended up taking that job, as I mentioned earlier, but I have zero regrets. And I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today without that experience. So I think it's very transferable to take that knowledge, skill set, and network into a vendor channel role in particular.
So this will be interesting. What do you think matters more, the roles you took or the people that you worked with?
Yeah, that's interesting because I'm going to mention a quote I saw on LinkedIn recently. And I'll probably get this slightly wrong, but always take the role where you like the people. At the end of the day, there's no clear career path, just great people and a career path that reveals itself along the way. And I read that and I thought, that's 100% true, because I didn't have that career path mapped out. But when I look back at my time working here, and I loved the people. The people were great. The people were, the culture that we had was amazing. And I still, consider a lot of those people really good friends today. And again, the same at the other steps in my career that I talked about, working for vendors as well. I think if you spend a lot of time at work, if you don't get on with the people, then really why are you doing what you do? It's so important. And so I think the people make any company. And yeah, as I say, it's very difficult to map out a career path more than a few years ahead, really. And so I think that, going back to that quote, be open to opportunities, because we work in an environment that's constantly changing and you never know what's around the corner. And so you can't easily predict what's going to happen, but just be open-minded and be ready to kind of take that left turn rather than the right turn that you thought you might take. And yeah, as I say, working with good people and having, some of those mentors that I talked about, even if they're more, subconscious mentors than actually ones that present themselves directly as mentors, is important.
So Is there any advice that you would want to leave anyone with who is either looking to enter the IT industry or is new into the industry, kind of looking to find their way? Is there a piece of advice that you would give? Or
I think I go back to those two core values. It's definitely something as a foundational skill: work hard, be nice to people, be yourself. I think that's important. Everybody wants to, really value difference in organisations. I've learned loads from younger people that have joined the companies I've worked for. That's how we move forwards. Be confident, kind of challenging how we do things as well. I think, companies progress. I would say good ideas come from everywhere with any business. They don't just come down from the execs. I think good execs value people to be confident presenting new ways of doing things and fostering that environment that's great to do that. It's not a bad thing to challenge constructively how a business operates and to present new ideas. So I think, obviously I'm not expecting somebody new joining a company to start asking loads of questions on day one. Take the time to really understand what's going on and then challenge some of those things in a good way. I think is really valuable information. It's something when I hire new people, I directly tell them that early on, don't assume everything we do is perfect, right? So if you see something and you're scratching your head thinking, well, why is it done that way? Tell me, I'm interested. I'd like to know, have you got a better way or another suggestion? Have you done it a different way in the past? Please tell us. And I think for, people joining, starting out early on in their career, they will have those same thoughts and questions, and that's really valuable, I think.
No such thing as a stupid question.
No, absolutely. Absolutely, I totally agree.
Thank you for that, and thank you for joining me today. It's been a great conversation.
Pleasure. I've enjoyed it. Thanks, Emma.